Life has an interesting way of teaching us its most valuable lessons when we least expect it. Today, I'll share with you a story that will touch your heart. The transformative journey of Richard, a 70-year-old businessman who discovered the true meaning of life in the most unexpected place, a nursing home. What began as a temporary 3-month stay turned into a profound journey of self-discovery, revealing truths that money cannot buy and time cannot erase. Get ready to learn the first of 7 lessons that forever change the way Richard, and perhaps you, perceive life and aging. The first lesson, the weight of loneliness. In that first week at the nursing home, Richard felt like a fish out of water. Used to leading meetings and making important decisions, he now found himself surrounded by unfamiliar faces and a routine he hadn't chosen. It was during a particularly silent breakfast that he met Margaret, an 85-year-old lady who, unlike the other residents, kept a serene smile on her face. "You know, young man," she said, surprising Richard with her firm voice, "the worst disease isn't in medical records. It's loneliness." Her words struck Richard like lightning. He thought of all the times he canceled Sunday lunches with his children to deal with emergencies at work, the unanswered calls from old friends, the family gatherings he attended only out of obligation, always with an eye on the clock. Margaret continued, "I built an entire life focused on work. Just like you, I had a beautiful home, a new car, a robust bank account. But do you know what I regret the most? The connections I let grow cold, the hugs I didn't give, the conversations I postponed." She paused, her eyes shining with wisdom that only years can bring. True wealth lies in the bonds we create, the memories we share, the love we give and receive. That night, lying in bed, Richard began making a different mental inventory, not of his material possessions or professional achievements, but of his relationships. How many people truly knew him beyond the title of a successful businessman? How many could say what his favorite color was, his favorite dish, his deepest fears? Loneliness, he realized, wasn't just the absence of people around. It was the absence of true connections, shared vulnerability, moments of genuine intimacy. In his relentless pursuit of success, he had built walls instead of bridges, accumulated possessions instead of memories, earned professional respect at the expense of personal closeness. This first lesson was crystal clear. It's not the zeros in our bank account that warm us on cold nights, not the trophies that console us in moments of pain, not the titles that hold our hand when we need comfort. It's the people, the connections, the bond we weave throughout life that truly matter. One morning during an exercise session in the nursing home garden, Richard met Bob, an 83-year-old man who practiced Tai Chi with enviable grace. While watching those fluid movements, Richard couldn't help but notice how stiff his own body had become after years of sitting through endless meetings. "You know, Richard," Bob began after finishing his morning practice, "when I was your age, I also thought health was something you could buy with expensive consultations and sophisticated tests. But the truth is much simpler, and at the same time, more challenging." Bob then shared his story. A former executive of a multinational company, he had a heart attack at age 65 that completely changed his perspective on health. "The body is like a savings account," he explained. "Every healthy habit is a deposit, every excess a withdrawal. The problem is that we only notice the balance when it goes negative." Richard thought about all the sleepless nights, rushed meals, and constant stress he considered normal in his routine as a businessman. How many times had he ignored the signs his body was giving him? The doctor's warnings about high blood pressure were always met with a "I'll deal with it later." Bob's wisdom extended beyond the movements of Tai Chi. "Did you know that our body has an incredible ability to regenerate? American studies show that even after the age of 70, we can strengthen our muscle mass, improve flexibility, and even increase cardiovascular capacity. The secret lies in consistency, not intensity." Bob continued his impromptu lesson, now demonstrating a few basic stretching movements. "I started practicing Tai Chi after the heart attack. At first, I thought it was something for old people, but I discovered it's a form of medicine in motion. Every conscious gesture is a celebration of what our body can still do. And more importantly, I learned that our diet is our first medicine. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the cafeteria. Ruth, a 75-year-old resident, had fainted during breakfast. High blood pressure, the nurse explained. She always refuses her medication, saying she doesn't need it. Richard recognized in that scene his own resistance to preventive health care. How many times had he himself neglected routine exams, ignored back pain, or dismissed the importance of a balanced diet? You see, Bob continued after the scare, it's not about living forever, but about living well with the time we have. Every nutritious meal, every good night's sleep, every consciously done exercise is an investment in quality of life. Did you know that a simple 30-minute walk a day can reduce the risk of heart disease by up to 30%? And that a diet rich in vegetables and whole grains can be more effective than many medications in controlling blood pressure and cholesterol? That afternoon, Richard asked to join the Tai Chi class. Between deep breaths and smooth movements, he began to understand that health wasn't just the absence of disease, but a delicate balance that needed to be cultivated daily. The secret, Bob shared, is to transform healthcare into an act of self-love, not an obligation. Gradually, Richard began adopting new habits: a walk after breakfast, breathing exercises before bed, meals taken slowly and with mindful attention. He discovered that the true luxury wasn't in the expensive restaurants he frequented, but in the ability to savor each bite of food with awareness and gratitude. He learned to prepare his own meals in the small communal kitchen, choosing fresh, natural ingredients. The lesson was clear. Health is a gift that needs to be cared for daily, not an inexhaustible resource we can afford to neglect. And most importantly, it's never too late to start taking better care of yourself. As Bob often said, every small step toward health is a declaration of love for your future. It was a quiet afternoon when Richard met James, a 78-year-old former banker, carefully organizing a small box of photographs in his room. "You know what's interesting?" said James, holding a yellowed photo. "Of all the things I've accumulated in my life, these photographs are the only ones that truly matter now." Richard observed James' simple room, a neatly made bed, a few books, and that precious box of memories. It was hard to imagine that this modest man had once been one of Wall Street's most successful executives. "When I moved here," James continued, "I had to choose what to bring with me. It was one of the most liberating experiences of my life." "How so?" Richard asked, intrigued by James's serenity as he spoke of leaving a life of luxury behind. "Well," James replied, picking up another photo, "have you noticed how we cling to things that, in the end, are just things? That expensive watch I bought in Geneva, it doesn't mark more precious moments than this cheap one. The Italian leather sofa, it doesn't make conversations more meaningful." A recent study from Harvard University, James explained, showed that elderly people who maintain strong social connections and meaningful experiences are 3 times happier than those who only accumulated material wealth. "True luxury," he smiled, "is having stories to tell, not things to show." It was a Wednesday when Richard met Eleanor, a 77-year-old retired teacher known for her enviable independence. While many residents waited for assistance with simple tasks, Eleanor maintained her own routine, from making her bed to caring for a small herb garden on the nursing home's balcony. "Every movement we make on our own is a celebration of life," Eleanor said as she carefully watered her mint and basil plants. "Do you know why I keep this garden? It's not just for the pleasure of having fresh herbs for my tea. It's a daily reminder that I can still create, care for, and nurture something with my own hands." Richard observed how she moved with purpose and determination. Her movements were slower than those of a younger person, but there was a special dignity in her independence. "When I first arrived here," Eleanor continued, "many told me to rest and let others do things for me. But I learned a precious truth from my grandmother. Our independence is like a muscle. If we don't use it, it atrophies." "Have you noticed," she asked, inviting Richard to sit on her small balcony, How some people seem to age faster when they stop doing things for themselves? She served mint tea in cups she had personally selected and purchased. Studies from Stanford University show that maintaining independence in daily activities not only preserves our physical abilities, but also protects our mental health and increases life expectancy. Eleanor shared her daily routine. She woke up early, did her own stretching exercises, carefully chose her clothes, and kept a journal where she wrote down her thoughts and plans. Every small decision we make for ourselves is a statement of life, she explained. From choosing what to wear to deciding when to go to bed, these are all declarations that we are still the protagonists of our story. At that moment, they heard a sound of frustration coming from a room next door. It was George, a new resident, struggling to button his shirt. "See," Eleanor said calmly, "many give up at the first difficulty, but there are ways to adapt, to find new paths to maintain our independence." She walked over to George's room and, instead of buttoning the shirt for him, showed him a small adaptive hook she had discovered herself. "It's not about doing everything exactly as we used to," she explained to Richard later. "It's about finding new ways to maintain our autonomy, even if we need some adaptations." Richard began to realize how much he had taken his independence for granted throughout his life. Now, he could clearly see how each autonomous gesture, from preparing his own coffee to deciding when to take a walk, was a precious gift that needed to be preserved and celebrated. True independence, Eleanor concluded as she picked a few basil leaves for dinner, isn't about not needing anyone, but about maintaining our ability to choose and act, even in small things. Every time we do something for ourselves, we're affirming our dignity and our worth. For the first time since arriving at the nursing home, Richard made his own bed and organized his clothes for the next day. These were simple gestures, but filled with meaning. The lesson was clear. Our independence is a treasure that must be nurtured and preserved, as it's through it that we maintain not only our physical autonomy, but also our dignity and self-love. On a particularly sunny morning, Richard found Grace sitting in the nursing home garden, a radiant smile on her face as she watched a hummingbird visiting the flowers. At 82, Grace was known for her unique ability to find joy in the simplest things in life. "You know, Richard," she said, without taking her eyes off the little bird, "I spent half my life chasing big moments, planning grand parties, expensive trips, always thinking happiness was an extraordinary event. But do you know where I found true joy? In having breakfast with my daughter on a regular day. In the lavender scent from my garden, in the sound of rain hitting the window." Richard sat beside her, intrigued by her serenity. "How did you come to this understanding?" he asked. Grace smiled, pulling a small, worn notebook from her pocket. "This is my gratitude journal. 5 years ago, my doctor told me about studies from a Mayo Clinic showing how practicing gratitude can boost our sense of well-being and even strengthen our immune system." Flipping through the pages of the notebook, she continued, "I started writing down 3 small joys every day. At first, I found it difficult. I was so used to valuing only big achievements. But little by little, my eyes opened to the extraordinary beauty of the ordinary." She showed some entries. "The Nurse Lucy's smile when bringing my medicine. The perfect taste of oatmeal at breakfast. A surprise letter from my grandson." Researchers at Harvard University discovered that people who practice daily gratitude have lower stress levels and a more positive outlook on aging, Grace explained. "But we don't need scientific studies to know that a grateful heart is a lighter heart, do we?" At that moment, a group of children from a local school arrived for their weekly visit to the nursing home. Grace's eyes lit up as she watched the little ones running and laughing. "See that? Another small joy from my journal. The sound of these children's laughter is worth more than any Broadway show I've ever seen." Richard began to realize how many years he had spent chasing grand moments while letting the magic of the everyday slip away. How many breakfasts had he eaten distractedly, checking emails? How many sunsets had he missed because he was stuck in endless meetings? Life is generous in offering us moments of joy, Grace continued, now watering flowers in pots. The secret is to be present enough to notice them. Every sip of fresh water, every gentle breeze, every sincere good morning is a gift. And the more we give thanks, the more gifts we receive. She then shared her nightly ritual. Before going to sleep, she would mentally relive the small, precious moments of the day. This not only helps me sleep better, but also trains my brain to notice more joys the next day. It's like creating a virtuous cycle of happiness. The lesson touched Richard deeply. That night, for the first time in decades, he allowed himself to simply sit and enjoy the sunset, the colors in the sky, the birds singing as they retreated, the peace of the present moment. Everything felt more alive, more significant. He understood that the true art of living isn't in grand events, but in the ability to find extraordinary beauty in the simplest and most ordinary moments of life. On a calm autumn afternoon, Richard found Thomas, an 85-year-old former pastor, sitting alone in the nursing home library. In his hands was an album of old photographs, and his gaze seemed to stretch across decades. "You know, Richard," Thomas began with a serene voice, "I carried a grudge for 40 years that weighed more than all the suitcases I've ever packed in my life." Thomas shared with Richard how he'd become estranged from his only brother over a family dispute that, in hindsight, seemed as insignificant as a drop in the ocean. Experts at the University of Michigan have discovered that holding on to resentment affects not only our mental peace, but also our physical health. It's like taking small doses of poison every day, expecting the other person to fall ill. "What's most interesting," Thomas continued, gently turning the pages of the album, "is that forgiveness isn't a gift we give others. It's a gift we give to ourselves." He showed a photo of two smiling boys, himself and his brother, fishing by a lake. "When I finally managed to forgive, it was as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Even my blood pressure improved." Richard thought of his own unresolved grudges. The business partner who betrayed him, the friend who let him down at a crucial moment, even his children, whom he secretly blamed for having abandoned him in the nursing home. How many resentments was he still carrying? "Modern science is only confirming what the wise have long known," Thomas explained. "Studies from the Mayo Clinic show that people who practice forgiveness have lower levels of anxiety, blood pressure, and a stronger immune system. But more important than that is the emotional liberation we feel." At that moment, Lucy, a 73-year-old resident, passed through the library. Thomas smiled warmly and greeted her. Later, he told Richard that Lucy had been the nurse who, through negligence, caused his wife's death 20 years ago. "Forgiving her was the hardest and most liberating process of my life. Today, we share tea every afternoon." "The secret," Thomas whispered, "is to understand that forgiving doesn't mean approving what happened. It doesn't mean forgetting or minimizing the pain. It means choosing our own peace above the fleeting satisfaction of anger or resentment. It's a decision we make not for others, but for ourselves." Richard began to realize how much precious energy he had wasted nurturing old grudges. Each resentment was like an anchor, keeping him tied to the past, preventing him from fully living in the present. "How did you start?" he asked Thomas. "I started small," Thomas replied with gentle smile. "First, I forgave the small offenses of daily life, the rude employee, the noisy neighbor. Then, gradually, I faced the bigger grievances. It's like exercising a muscle. It starts hard, but it gets easier with practice." The lesson touched Richard deeply. That night, alone in his room, he began writing letters that would never be sent, to his former business partner, to distant friends, to his children. In each letter, he let go of some of the weight he had been carrying. He realized that forgiveness wasn't a destination, but a daily journey of choosing inner peace over resentment. Thomas's wisdom echoed in his mind. Every day we live in anger is a day we lose living with joy. Forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it certainly opens the doors to a lighter and happier future. The seventh lesson, the urgency of living each day fully. The moment that changed everything happened on what seemed like an ordinary morning. Richard was having breakfast when he learned that David, one of the most beloved residents of the nursing home, had passed away during the night. David, at 88, was known for his contagious vitality and for always saying, "Today is the best day of my life." "You know what's most interesting?" commented Sarah, the head nurse, as she organized David's belongings. "He left a letter for all of us." Richard watched as she carefully unfolded a piece of paper with firm and clear handwriting. "My dear friends," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I've finally gone to meet my beloved Elizabeth. But before I left, I wanted to share the secret I discovered at 75 when I received my fragile heart diagnosis. Life isn't measured in years, but in moments of true presence." Richard felt a lump in his throat as Sarah continued reading. "The doctors gave me 6 months to live 13 years ago. But instead of giving in to fear, I decided to make each day a masterpiece. I discovered that the secret isn't in how much time we have, but in how we use the time we're given." David's letter continued, revealing how he had transformed his diagnosis into an awakening. Studies from Stanford University show that people who live with purpose and gratitude not only live longer, but live better. It's not about the quantity of time, but the quality of presence. Richard recalled all the mornings he had seen David in the garden, practicing his gentle exercises, always with a smile. How he greeted each person by name, dedicated time to listen to the stories of others, and celebrated every small victory, from a blooming flower to a bird visiting his window. "Life is generous in giving us second chances," the letter continued. "But we shouldn't waste them waiting for the perfect moment. The perfect moment is now. Happiness isn't in next year, the next achievement, or the next goal. It's here now, in this very instant." David's words profoundly moved everyone. In his final lesson, he had left the most precious gift: the understanding that each moment is an opportunity for love, growth, and genuine connection. Richard realized that his 7 weeks in the nursing home weren't an end, but a beginning. Each lesson, about loneliness, health, material possessions, independence, small joys, and forgiveness, culminated in this final truth: the urgency of living fully here and now. "Life," David wrote his final words, "is like a dance. It doesn't matter how many steps we have left, but how we dance each step along the way. Dance with joy, my friends. Dance as if no one is watching. Love as if you've never been hurt. Live as if each day were truly the best day of your lives." That evening, the residents organized a small celebration in David's memory. It wasn't a moment of sadness, but a celebration of life, love, and shared wisdom. Richard, looking around, saw in each face a reflection of the transformation he himself had experienced. The final lesson was clear: life is too precious to be lived on autopilot. Each moment is an opportunity for love, growth, and true connection. Time waits for no one, and true wisdom lies in making every moment a conscious celebration of the gift of being alive.